meeting of the Texas Appraiser Licensing Board to order. Today is Friday, August 21st, 2020, and we welcome everybody by video conference. I would say that I can hear some background noise, so if you're not speaking, if you'll go ahead and put yourself on mute. We will now have a roll call.
Chair Sarah Oates.
Present.
Martha Gail Reed Lynch.
Present.
Chance Bolton.
Present.
Clayton Black.
Present.
Jim Jeffries.
Present.
Tony Pena.
Present.
Buster Renfro.
I am present.
Stephanie Robinson.
Present.
And Lisa Sprinkle.
Okay, we will make sure to note when Ms. Sprinkle arrives. Agenda item number 3, I'd like to go ahead and let everybody know that we will move agenda item number 13, the executive session, to just before agenda item number 17, so between 16 and 17, hoping that lands about in the middle of the meeting. We aren't going to do the Pledge of Allegiance because it's a little awkward in this setting, so I have asked Ms. Reed Lynch to open the meeting with our mission moment.
Thank you, Sarah. The TALCB mission statement reads, the agency exists to safeguard the public interest and protect consumers of real estate services in accordance with state and federal laws. The agency oversees real estate brokerage, appraisal, inspection, home warranty, right-of-way services, and timeshare interest providers. Through education, licensing, and regulation, the agency ensures the availability of qualified and ethical service providers, thereby facilitating economic growth and opportunity across Texas. Simply stated, the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board's mission is to protect consumers of real property appraisal services. Protection is achieved by creating policy and rules to ensure high standards for qualifications and ensure ethical and honest behavior in the appraisal industry. Again, simplified, very simplified. First, the board makes policies and rules to protect consumers. Second, the agency and staff operate to fulfill the board's directives and enforce these decisions, rules, and policies created by the board. Third, the board oversees the agency and staff to ensure that the agency's directives are carried out at the will of the board, and ultimately the public is safeguarded. The board is charged by the governor's office to protect Texans using real property valuation services while facilitating and encouraging economic growth and opportunity across the state of Texas. Recent directives from Governor Abbott include removing barriers to the appraisal industry's entry through burdensome regulation, cumbersome licensing requirements and fees, and making a better application process. And at the same time, upholding high standards and ethical practice by Texas appraisers. To me, serving on the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board is a great honor and privilege. And with that comes great responsibility. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Reed Lynch. I appreciate that, and I feel the same way. I'd like to also take this opportunity to recognize the passing of Jim Jacobs, who lost his battle with cancer in early July. Jim was a staff investigator for the board for 8 years, and prior to that, I worked closely with Jim on the original AMC legislation when he was the president of FACT. He was well known and respected in the appraiser community through both of those roles, as well as being a USPAP instructor all over the country. On behalf of the board, I would like to extend my condolences to his family and his colleagues at the agency. Troy Boyer would like to say a few words.
Good morning, Madam Chair, board members. I'm Troy Bollier, Director of Enforcement. And Jim was on my staff for almost 8 years. Jim was an appraiser, he was an educator, he was an industry leader, and he was also a friend and a colleague. And as an appraiser, Jim was involved in the appraisal industry for 50 years. He did independent fee work as a residential and commercial appraiser. He worked for Fannie Mae for a time, for lending institutions. He served on his county's, as the chair of his county's appraisal review board. And for the past about 7.5 years, he was an investigator on our team. And Jim was also an educator, and he really thrived and enjoyed teaching people, especially about real estate valuation and USPAP. In fact, anybody who's gotten to know Jim knows that he's a little bit of a nerd about USPAP. He had a license plate that said USPAP on it, and people often gave him grief about that. But he was an AQB certified USPAP instructor, and he really enjoyed teaching people and talking about ideas. And he was also an industry leader. He was recognized by the National Association of Independent Fee Appraisers as their Teacher of the Year in 2012, and he was president of FACT during a really crucial legislative period when the agency obtained their SDSI status as a independent agency, and also when we passed the AMC legislation. But most importantly, Jim was a real good friend and a colleague. He had a really great sense of humor. One of the best memories I have is during a team meeting, he announced to everyone that he was giving me an honorary USPAP license plate, but it was a provisional appointment contingent upon me continuing my good behavior. Jim has touched a lot of people's lives. I'm sure you all have memories of him, and he's made an impact in the industry, and he'll be remembered for that, and we're honoring him here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Troy.
Thank you.
Along those lines, we would also like to recognize another Jim. Agenda item number 4 is the recognition of an outgoing board member. Jim Jeffries is retiring from the board next month, and our board secretary, Mr. Bolton, who has served with Jim for 4 years, would like to say a few words on behalf of the board.
So I'd like to acknowledge Jim, who's stepping down after 6 years of service on the board. Jim was first appointed in 2014 by Governor Perry and reappointed in 2017 by Governor Abbott. He served on the Education Committee since February of 2015, many of those years as the chairman. He's also served as the vice chair of the board in 2016 and 17. When decisions need to be made, we could always count on Jim to speak up with important questions and be unafraid to directly challenge a majority opinion. Jim, I think that you've distinguished yourself as a judicious steward of our organization, and you never flinched in the face of difficult decisions such as evaluations. We appreciate that you used all of your experience, skill, knowledge, and education to move our organization forward. I'm grateful for the time we spent together tackling the challenges that we faced here. As your service to the board comes to an end, we want you to know that your commitment to, and service to the board, the appraisers, and the people of the state of Texas is greatly appreciated. Now, we can like to open the floor to anybody else that would like to say some words. Thank you.
I would like to say something, Jim. I've always considered you to be a gentle warrior. You always had you always had your opinion, but you were a class act. You could say what was on your mind, in a very respectful manner. I appreciate that more than you know, and I've always enjoyed being in conversation with you. And you're diligent in your assignment. You took the job seriously. You brought critical insight to our discussions, and you've served the state of Texas well. It's been a pleasure serving on this board with you, Jim, and I feel like we've made a great friendship. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Reed Lynch. We've also received a request for public comment on this agenda item from our former chair, Ms. Jamie Wycliffe. Is she available on the phone?
No, it doesn't look like she's available at this time.
Okay, we will give her an opportunity to speak whenever she wants to join. I know that Commissioner Buchholz would also like to say a few words.
Absolutely. Just this morning, I received a request to read a few words from former Commissioner Olmixon. So I will share his message and then attach my own. Mr. Olmixon says, Jim, your many years of dedicated service on the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board are a tribute to your commitment to public service that will remain always to your great credit. The appraisal profession and the citizens of Texas have both enjoyed the benefit of your insight and wisdom, always offered with a gentle temperament and no small amount of good humor. It was a great pleasure and a distinct privilege to serve alongside you for those years. We are grateful that you generously volunteered to serve and did so well. Wishing you all the very best, your colleague in service, Doug Olmixon. And I would like to add that I spend a lot of time talking with our staff about professional kindness. I think it's possible to take a kind approach in all of our workplace interactions. We may not always see eye to eye, but we will be respectful and kind in the way we engage with others. Now, my time here to overlap with you, Mr. Jeffries, has been short. But from my earliest interactions, it was clear to me that you are kind and that you believe the best in people. And even in opposition, you provide an even respectful spirit. So, Mr. Jeffries, I'm delighted for you to have time to spend doing what is the most important, to slow down and to spend time with your family. But I will forever be grateful for our overlap, our short overlap, and for the kind leadership you've provided here. Thank you for your service.
And I'd like to say a few words if I can.
Absolutely.
Jim, I am going to miss you terribly. One of the fondest memories I have is when I did join the board. You were certainly one of the ones that was extremely welcoming. Even when I joined the education committee with you, you were always very welcoming and helpful in every way, and I certainly appreciate that. I was really looking forward to picking your brain and getting all the knowledge you've gathered over the years, because it's been, you were certainly one of the most knowledgeable ones I'd imagine in our industry. And I was really looking forward to learning so much from you. I learned so much from you in the short period of time that we did have to work together. But most importantly, thank you so much for welcoming me with open arms and being available if I needed anything or had any questions. You would be greatly missed, and I hope that we can stay in contact in the future. Thank you so much for your service.
Madam Chair, this is Caden. Better jump in here real quick too as well. Jim, I'll make it really short and sweet, brother, but it has been a pleasure serving with you, and your experience and wisdom that you brought to this board, just kind of echoing what everyone else is saying, it's just been invaluable. And Jim, I've known you your entire tenure on the board, since I believe I'm been on the board longer than anyone at this point. I've seen you whenever you came in. I was also appointed by Rick Perry originally, and so we've hung in there and stayed the course. But I'll consider you a friend for life, and we'll hope that we'll get to see you again in the near future. So come join us at any time. But just thank you again for your service to the great state of Texas, and it's been invaluable. And I'll always value you as a friend as well. So thanks a lot, Jim, and I wish you well in all your future endeavors, whatever life has for you ahead. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Clayton.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr.
Madam Chair, I'd like to say a few words.
Please do.
Be nice. Jim, what can I say? Yeah, I knew you were going to say that. So, Jim and I have known each other a really, really long time. And first of all, I've got to say this. I've learned a lot from Jim about the profession over the years that I've known him. But like Clayton pointed out, Jim, Clayton, and I think, are the longest serving members on the board at the time. And I can say this, even though I knew you and we've been good friends, as can be said and attested by everybody's comments, Jim, you're truly one of the really good guys. Not only are you a good guy to this profession, but you're one of the really good guys for life in general. But it's been a privilege and a pleasure to serve on this board with you. I could go on a long time, but what I want to say is this, that your devotion, your commitment, and your contribution to this board has been a real benefit to the board, to the agency, and to the profession overall, and it will surely be missed. Thank you, sir, for your service. And keep in touch, as I know you will, because you always like to give me a call and discuss appraisal problems, which I benefit from that also. So thanks a lot, Guy. We appreciate you, and we wish you only the very best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to everybody that took time to speak. I think it says a lot about Jim, who you are as a person and your contribution to this board. So on behalf of the board and the 6,000 appraisers in the state of Texas, we certainly appreciate you and appreciate your time on the board. Were we able to connect with Ms. Whitcliffe? No. Okay. We will make time for her if she does want to come on. I know that y'all served for a lot of years together, and so we certainly want to give her that opportunity. We will move on now to agenda item number 5, which is the general comments from visitors on non-agenda items. I'm sorry, before I do that, can we recognize Ms. Sprinkle? Has she joined us? Okay, so I want to just make that part of the official record that Lisa, if you're there, do you want to just speak up? That way we can.
Yes, I'm here.
Very good. All right, we've got her. So we want to recognize that she has joined the meeting. So I'll just get this out. So if I'm going to give you an email address, so if anybody is listening and would like to comment, I will provide that momentarily. So if you wish to speak on a matter specifically listed on the agenda, you may do so at the time of that agenda item. If you're a member of the public wishing to speak on a non-agenda item or agenda item that you have not signed up for, then you can email general.counsel@talcb.texas.gov, and we will make an opportunity for you to speak. That's the way that you can join the meeting today. So at this point, we have not received any requests from members of the public to speak. That takes us to agenda item number 6, the ratification of the official record of the May 15th, 2020 board meeting as approved for posting on the website by the secretary of the board. Does anyone have any changes to that record? Hearing none, I will hear a motion.
Madam Chair, I would like to move that the board ratify. I would like to move that the board ratify the minutes of the May 15th, 2020 board meeting.
I'll second that.
We have a motion by Mr. Jeffries and a second by Mr. Black. Is there any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion passes unanimously.
Sarah,
Yes, sir.
I think that motion was actually made by Mr. Renfro.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Do I need to do anything to specifically correct that, Chelsea? Okay, very good. I apologize. It's hard to see. I get my kids mixed up too. Okay, so this takes us to agenda item number 7, which are the final orders and surrenders enforcement matters under A, B, C, D, E, and F. We did not receive any requests for public comment on any of these matters. Do any board members have any questions about the surrender or final orders? Hearing none, I will remind you that no action is required from the board on this agenda item. That takes us to agenda item number 8. The executive committee report is included in the meeting materials. I have seen and approved this report. And there's nothing that I feel necessary to highlight from this, but I'm open to any questions that any board members have about that report. Agenda item number 9 is the report by the Enforcement Committee. Mr. Bolton, the Enforcement Committee report is included in the supplemental meeting materials. You have seen and approved this report?
I have. I'd like to, if you don't mind, I'd like to highlight a couple of things because we had kind of a confusing couple of meetings that I'd like to just clarify what we've done.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we did have 2 meetings, one on June 8th and another on August 4th. A couple of things that where we discussed issues in both of those meetings. The first one is that we made a recommendation for defining a process for bad faith complaints, identifying bad faith complaints so that they can be dismissed. And we abated that in the second meeting, that recommendation, so that we could allow changes that are occurring to the rules, which specifically 153 Tech 2.4. We abated our recommendation to allow for the rules that are currently set to be revised, can be revised if we, as a board, voted to amend 153 Tech 2.4 again. It would start over the process for the rules that we have already voted to change. So we're just delaying that. The second thing is, in the first meeting, we had a discussion about board enforcement review committees. Between the first and second meeting, we came to understand through talking with staff that we would have to have significant rewrites of 153 Tech 2.4. And instead, we, in the second meeting, began to explore utilizing the rules for the peer investigative committee to accomplish the same goal of board oversight. And we will be creating a working group and to explore that and define how what changes would be needed in the rules, if any. I would encourage board members that might be interested in looking at that issue in the working group to reach out to me, as in the next probably week or so we'll be formalizing the members of that committee and getting started. We also, the committee voted that staff no longer require work files for audits, and they implemented that. And we think that that is a great change, or I think it's a great change, and expect that it will increase efficiency in the audit process. We also discussed a concept of moving audits to licensing from enforcement. We haven't taken any issue, and I expect that we will explore that at a later time. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is we have made a recommendation that in the case of correspondence from the agency to trainees, that a supervisor, the supervisory appraiser, be noticed of that correspondence. We are working, have been working with staff to kind of iron out the details of that. But my understanding is that we've figured out at least a basic framework to make that happen. And I think for all supervisory appraisers, this is a very good thing, so that they understand everything that's going on in the relationship between them, their trainee, and the agency. And so that's all I have for our committee report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bolton. Does anybody have any questions? I know that we're going to touch on some of those items again later in the agenda on agenda item number 21, but does anybody have any questions of Mr. Bolton? Very good. Agenda item number 10, the report by the Education Committee. Mr. Jeffries, the Education Committee report is included in the meeting materials. You have seen and approved this report?
I have.
Very good. Is there anything that you would like to highlight or discuss?
Well, I would just like to mention the fact that we have had some discussion, serious extended discussion over several different committee meetings about the exam rate passage in Texas, and we've wrestled with that question, and I think the latest item is that we've had a letter go out to some of the states with more appraisers, with a larger number of appraisers, and hopefully we'll have some feedback at the next education committee meeting, and see if we're experiencing things that the rest of the country are. So we really have been disappointed about the pass rate. I know everybody on the board has, and particularly the education committee. We've addressed a couple of other items which are going to be seen again this morning. One of them is agenda item 15A and agenda item 15B. So that's two items that will come before the board for passage or consideration this morning. We've also, I think it's good to highlight the fact that we're looking at and wrestling with this question of the one-time course offerings for continuing education, and still haven't resolved that issue. But right now the staff is providing an estimate of administrative costs for reviewing and approving those one-time courses. And that's when will be referred to the budget committee. So those are a couple items I think was important enough that they get some emphasis. So thank you very much.
I agree with that. Thank you very much, Mr. Jeffries, for your last committee meeting report. Agenda item number 11, the report by Budget Committee. Mr. Pena, the Budget Committee report is included in meeting materials. Have you seen and approved this report?
Yes, I have approved it and I have seen it.
Very good. Is there anything that you would like to highlight from that?
Well, we do have a discussion in item number 17 regarding the budget, but I would like to commend staff and the team. We've had a major transition during this time. It seems as if we went really smoothly and flawlessly. They developed their own style and developed their own means of transparency in how they report. Budgeting is looking into the future, and that's a fluid thing, but it's important to be able to just portray it accurately and transparently to the people that are reading it. I think in this transition, we've done a great job of doing that. They've added they've got their fingerprints on it, and I think that's important. So just the team did a great job going from one group to the next since the last quarter and then beyond. So I just would like to commend the team and the budget staff and the budget committee for the work they've done the last 6 months or so.
Thank you, Mr. Pena. That takes us to agenda item number 12, which is staff reports on agency operations, initiatives, and statistical data. Just so that everybody that is following along, if you're on the PDF, page number is 75 through 98 are the pages that we'll be looking at. And I will let staff introduce this.
Okay, this is Chelsea Buckholz, Commissioner. You will find a short document that highlights the details of the statistical report. So you will not hear from all of the division directors that contributed to these reports, but I did want to make sure you had that information. You'll hear today only from me and Tony in terms of staff reports, unless you have any questions on the reports. All directors are here to answer those questions. So hello again to each of you. I hope your you and your families remain safe and well. I'm sorry that we're not in person. I'm grateful for the virtual opportunity, but it's going to be a very good day when we are again in the same room. I miss what comes from being in the same room, but I'm certainly grateful for our IT team for leading the charge on our ability to be remote. I'll begin with just a short update on how the agency is continuing to handle COVID-19. We remain almost entirely remote, and our workforce has, for the most part, remained very healthy. About the same time, around June 15th, that we provided an opportunity for volunteers to begin returning to the office. the infection numbers in Austin skyrocketed, and the danger of returning to the office seemed to increase. So we continue to have those protocols in place for when a more robust return to the office does occur. But I have committed to our staff that they will not be required to return to the office until we're on the other side of this pandemic, until it's safe to do so. And so that likely means until there's a vaccine that's available. We will remain on a volunteer basis, and we'll today we would cap that capacity at 25% at any given time, though we are not close to that today. We have a handful of staff at any given time. Many of our staff have the hardship of navigating work and young children and school needs and other burdens that come from the pandemic. I know all of you are experiencing some of that as well. And we remain fully able to fulfill our mission remotely. So we will allow flexibility from staff on how and when they work to account for these unprecedented burdens. So you may receive an email from staff at odd times, and that is likely because there's great flexibility in the hours that staff work, as long as they get those hours in. But in some ways, and because of that flexibility, we remain as productive or more productive than ever. I'm very proud of our team and how they've handled this. As you know, the governor deemed all of our license holders to be essential. And the license holders really of all types, continue to work in these unique times. We extended all applications and renewals starting in March, and those extensions ended in July. So our licensing and our customer relations teams have been hard at work to address the processing and the questions associated with those 5 months of applications and renewals that have flooded in because of those extensions. We did conclude that process earlier this week, and as of this month, renewals and applications are no longer subject to the extensions. In the midst, as you know, of the processing these mountains of applications and renewals, we had an issue with our mail. The company that we utilize to securely shred documents that we no longer need inadvertently shredded one morning's worth of mail. We received mail twice a day. We estimate that could be upwards of about 70 pieces of mail that were very securely destroyed. Over the past few weeks, we've publicized this and have asked those who could have sent us mail between the days of July 9th and July 20th to check to see if it was processed. They can do this with some of our online processing tools, or if it was a check, to see if it had been cashed by checking with their bank. We've also provided a mechanism for individuals to contact the agency to double check through a specific email address, or it's actually the kind of generic email address that populates a subject line, so we know what that looks like. But the short version is we have no idea what we didn't receive, and time will tell that. It will be a hardship to the license holders who this affects, though it will affect few. Those it does affect, it will, I think, be a significant hardship. So, of course, we will waive any late fees that may come from this inconvenience, and we'll watch this issue closely so that we can be attentive to the license holders that it has affected. Of course, we've changed our process so that this cannot happen again. On the appraiser side, we did see a dip in our renewal numbers that we assume and are, it's likely related to COVID-19. But it's much too soon for us to make any sort of decision on this data or even to trust it, because these numbers are slow to be finalized. We do expect at the next board meeting, however, to have a much better idea of what, if there still is a dip, if we've recovered from it, and what COVID-19 has done to us in the long term from a numbers perspective. On the enforcement side, we've reached an important milestone. We have dipped below the 180-day threshold for processing complaints, as directed by the Sunset Review, the recent Sunset Review. The Enforcement Division is working very hard to process those complaints efficiently and with a fair hand. And just so that each of you know, I am doing what I can to dig deep into this process, just to ensure that I have a very strong understanding of the nuances associated with this work. I think that there's a lot to be said in the nuances. That we have big broad boundaries, but I think where we can make a huge effective difference is in those nuances. So I'm looking into that. We're also examining a simple way to share cases that we dismiss with you. Right now you see agreed orders and anything that goes to SOA, of course, which is very rare. Most of the cases are complaints are dismissed on a number of levels, and so I want you to see those. Just to have a better context of the full picture. They are not publicly available on our website, and so we're just working on the best mechanism to share that with you in an efficient way, just for you to have a full picture of the enforcement decisions being made. So you should be receiving those soon, and I'll update you as we get closer to that process. So in other news, I have named Tawana Hood as our new Human Resources Director. We hope to soon have a replacement for her previous position so that we have a rounded out, complete human resources team. Tawana is a very strong natural leader at our agency, someone that many have relied on for a long time. I'm delighted to have her on the leadership team. And of course, as you know, after the last board meeting in May, Renata Williams began as our Director of Finance, and she's already been a significant contributor. And as Mr. Pena mentioned, the Budget Committee has already had a chance to get to know her a bit and work with her as she has worked with them at the committee meetings. But you will hear from her later on the agenda, so treat this as my introduction of her to you. I'm delighted to have her on board. These are very important hires and truly the last building blocks of our leadership team under my leadership. And I'm delighted to have this complete team. So with that, I'm happy to address anything that's on your mind.
Chelsea, I just wanted to say that the board members, you all might have been introduced to Tawana, or at least I was, and we worked closely with her whenever we were hiring for the commissioner's position. And I just want to say I'm thrilled with that, with her new position, because I was very impressed with her professionalism and her knowledge during that period of time that we worked together. So I'm glad to hear that. I did want to ask you, Chelsea, if you could just expand a little bit on the dip in renewals, what that means. My concern is that we extended, and maybe somebody can kind of speak to this more so that we know, because as you know, as board members, these are the type of questions that we get when somebody's trying to renew and can't. A renewal takes a long time, the education, they don't understand the new process, that sort of thing. So there was an extension. So if you expired, in like March, April, or May, there was an extension, and then now we're trying to process them in real time. We think all education providers are back in the full swing of things. People can take tests, all of that can happen, and that's why we're now back to real-time renewals. Is that?
That's exactly right. So it seemed very important, and I've explained this to license holders because, you know, the pandemic continues. So why are we not continuing to extend, right? Our extension period, for lack of a better way of saying it, was really for us and the field to get their feet under them, right? How can we receive our continuing education? What does this look like in this new environment? However, there's a tension between that and then being considered essential, meaning folks are still working. And so the need to be educated and fully equipped with the proper tools, it continues to be necessary from a consumer protection standpoint. So that is the reason that we concluded those extensions. All of everything that license holders need to do to renew or to apply or to complete their application can be done remotely. There are a few instances we have found where individuals shouldn't, have a compromised immune system, or for one reason or another cannot go take the test within the deadline period. We can accommodate that with a case-by-case extension. So we're doing those on to some limited degree. We're very flexible. It just hasn't come to us in very many instances. But as far as the renewal numbers, I see Denise on the screen, and also Tony Slagle. I think they may be in a better place to give you a fuller picture to answer your question.
Good morning. This is Denise Sample, Director of Licensing. So when we produce these reports, it has been, identifying the renewal rate out of license holders that expire in that reporting period or through that reporting period. So when we did adjust 4 months, March, April, May, and June licenses to July, that we knew that would kind of take a while for us to see. So it's likely we'll know more after we run August reports to see how many of those licenses have in fact renewed. So there was a little bit of grace given towards the end of that July 31st deadline as well. People still trying to get their classes in. So I think that's why we likely don't have solid information on whether we've bounced back from whatever dip we took, because we did fully expect if you give people extra time to renew, most of them will take that extra time to renew.
Okay, yeah, and if there's anything that we need to be aware of or any kind of changes that we need to make, on a policy level before the next meeting, I certainly don't want anyone to not be able to renew or, for us to have a lot of license holders out there that are going around, unlicensed or if there's some kind of issue. So just keep us apprised of that.
Yeah, appraisers tend to renew in greater numbers than our other licenses in the agency that might have deferral options. So appraisers generally renew timely. We don't process a lot of late appraiser renewals, but it's still, because we adjusted those dates into August, that's what makes it hard to capture at this point.
Okay.
So my question is that the appraisers can take all their continuing education online, and there should be no problem getting that education strictly online.
That's correct. And Jen Wheeler, I believe if she's on the video as well.
Hi there. Good morning, everyone. Yes, Jennifer Wheeler, Director of Education. The AQB and the ASD have made some allowances as well that allow for courses that have previously been approved for classroom instruction to be approved or to be offered through a live webinar scenario with certain criteria in place. And so the feedback that we've gotten is that pretty much all the ACE education providers have moved to that platform, and I have not seen any real issues with anybody needing to obtain education that hasn't been able to.
Very good. Very good.
And I have a quick question on this as well.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So when you talk about a dip from a numbers perspective, where should we be and where are we in terms of the numbers of renewals?
Great. That's the information that we're hoping to have a better handle on before the next board meeting, because of the fact that we actually adjusted expiration dates. That kind of skewed the numbers for how many were eligible to renew in June. Well, we've moved a significant portion of our licenses to expire in July. So we're hoping that once we get through August and get into that reporting period where we can run that report, we'll have a better idea of where we should be and how we've recovered.
Can you send that to me? I'd like to make sure that the dip that we see in renewals, we do in fact overcome that and get back to the numbers that we need to be, because that's going to affect financing and everything else. So if there's a way I can see, or if the rest of the board members are interested as well, I'm sure, but I want to see, what the dip really was, and I want to make sure that we've overcome that and exceeded what those numbers should be.
Great. We can make sure to share those August reports once they're available.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
And I'll reiterate your sentiment, Ms. Robinson, that obviously the renewals tells us if we're doing our job in education, in licensing, it gives us a budget. And so I'm assuming that we sort of look at the numbers like every month or every year, a certain number of people just don't renew. That happens. And so maybe it's a 98% renewal rate or something, and then we have that to compare to over the last several months. Is that kind of how we track it, Denise?
Well, the difficulty with moving the expiration dates makes it hard to track month by month. But Tony Slagle and I were recently discussing how if we look at this combined with the revenue, that might help us get a better picture instead of just looking at month by month. But yeah, the August reports, the benefit of those reports is that'll be the end of the fiscal year. And so we'll be able to truly compare, fiscal year 20 in its entirety to fiscal year 19 and 18 for the same group that renews every 2 years. So
Awesome.
we'll be able to perform a better analysis at the end of August.
And I did want to give just a little bit of context. Mr. Bolton and I discussed this, I believe it was last week, but we are working with a licensing database system that is what I would describe as close to end of life. And that we are in the process of replacing over the next couple of fiscal years, and that's funded on the TREC side. So we are creating a wish list of how what the new one will look like and how it will run better for us. And one of our challenges with these extensions has been kind of just working with our old system. What we learned with Hurricane Harvey, and stop me if this is not helpful, or Denise if I get anything wrong, but what we did with Hurricane Harvey is for the areas that were impacted, we gave them a license, we extended their license period, and we gave them this temporary short-term Harvey license. It said, you have an expiration date of, let's use July of 2022. But then we reverted it back to what their original renewal month was after Harvey was behind us. So we would then send them a more permanent license that said you expire April of 2022. So then they had these licenses that was competing. So what we did this go around instead is that instead of we sent them a letter saying, you're set to expire April of 2020, you have an extension until July of 2020. So your expiration date, your new expiration date for now is July of 2022. But use this letter to show that you're current. And then once we're on the other side of this extension, we will send you your license that reverts back to the original date, April of 2022. That letter is very confusing, but we don't have the two competing licenses out there. But we have, over the last week or two, and I think are continuing to finish this process, reverting those licenses back to the original months. The reason for doing that is so that we don't have 5/12 of this year's licenses all come due in 2 years in July, right? From a process perspective, that doesn't work. So we need to return them to the original month so that we have a more balanced approach. So there's a lot of moving parts that are just operational in nature, and that make my head scratch. I scratch my head a lot over it, but that is why data is in flux right now. But it soon will not be.
I have a couple comments.
Please, Mr. Renfro.
I'd like to make a couple comments. First of all, on the positive side, I would like to congratulate the agency and Troy's department on hitting the target and falling below the 180-day turnaround. Good job. I'm glad to see that. And let's keep up the progress, keep moving forward. With regard to these extension of these renewals, I'm just curious, is there any way that we could just ballpark? Would you say 50% of the people took us up on the extension? I mean, 30%? I mean, we ought to be able to know how many people were due to renew who decided to use the full extension or just a portion of the extension in some kind of a ballpark so that we know what to expect moving forward. Because if we have a dip, we're certainly going to have a surge at some point, and we need to be prepared for that. And the other thing is, while it's true that you can get most of your education remotely, and it's also understandable that when this pandemic hit, out of uncertainty, that we offered this extension in March, back when it all began, I would say that we're not even close to getting back to normal, and we don't really even know when we're going to get back to normal. And to all of a sudden say to the people who renew from this point forward, we're not flexible anymore, I'm not sure that's a very good message to send. And so I think I would hope that we keep an open mind that, yes, you can get a lot of education remotely and online, but a lot of providers are still sending out, I know to myself, maybe Chance and Jim, you've seen this, and Martha, they're still asking the stakeholders, what do you think about us holding a class? Do you think you would attend if we held a class? And so we're not really back to normal. And so a lot of education that we were used to getting by attending these one-day seminars, which I think is, is the way I like to do it, is still not available. So I guess my point is, it just doesn't seem fair to me to all of a sudden say, oh, it's time that we automatically get back to normal business, no more flexibility, no more extensions. And I know there's an impact on the finances, and I understand that, but I think we should look at this with a little bit of an open mind until we do get back to some a semblance of normalcy, which I don't know when that's going to happen.
Buster, what do you propose?
Well, I'm not proposing anything. I just don't know if we should shut the doors, what I'm trying to say. I would hope that very few people took us up on this extension, but I understand what Denise said, that if you're given more time, everybody takes it. But, if I had some idea that it was 20% of the people or 100% of the people, then I'd be more prepared to say, then let's maybe move forward like we are. But, I have nothing to work with right now to even figure out how to move forward, because you're telling us that you don't have any real numbers to give us to use as a guide.
Well, to speak to that, Buster, so hearing what the commissioner said previously, appraisers are essential, so we can't just let them go into, an infinite number of renewals. And additionally, then that messes up all of the next 2-year cycle renewals, which I know that we had to back some up. And so we're trying to manage that whole thing. But if we're not going to get in-person learning for another 6 months, a year, who knows, we can't just let appraisers go unrenewed.
No, that's not my point. Is it sounded like we were offered an extremely amount of flexibility to start with, and now we're trying to get back to normal. And I'm saying I think we're in an environment where we still need to have some flexibility. For instance, I renew next April, and I never like to wait till the last minute. So I've been looking at my hours. I mean, one of the biggest programs that was offered statewide in April got canceled due to COVID. And I know a number of my appraisers that work for me missed those 12 hours, and we're scrambling to figure out ways. I mean, I don't like taking something online just to get hours. I mean, maybe everybody else does, but I don't like to do that. I want to be sure that we know for a fact that that there is more courses being offered, not just the same that there's always been, and that it is not a burden for some of these appraisers to find their hours. And I don't want us to shut the door and not being flexible. I still think it is a troubled times. It's difficult to get hours. It's not like it used to be. So I think we should be able to afford some flexibility until this whole thing gets straightened out and we do get somewhere back to normal. It just sounded to me like that's it. March to June was it, and now we're back to normal. You renew, and if you're late, you're late.
Yeah, and I think I heard Chelsea say that they were being flexible on a case-by-case basis. So maybe Mr. Renfro, what you're asking is that we just direct staff to continue with that flexibility for the license holder, so that it's not so rigid. So I think that they can continue on the same path that's on. Is that good? Is that good directive?
Yeah, that sounds fine to me. I mean, I'm just hoping we're not, just trying to pretend like things are back to normal. I mean, I think we should be able to offer some type of reasonable flexibility until we get behind this situation.
Why couldn't we just let it be known through the website or email that license holders who are coming up for renewal at the current period, if you need one, you can request an extension? Done on a case-by-case basis, but but I'm not sure. I didn't know that there was flexibility still, and I just renewed my license, and so I think that if the licensees knew that if they needed it, they could ask for it, that might solve the problem.
That sounds great.
Is that an administrative nightmare for you, Denise?
Well, I think I do want to clarify, and Chelsea, jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but with initial applications, we definitely have a lot more flexibility to extend the time that they've got to meet all of the requirements. And the thinking is that there's not any risk to the public because they still have to meet all of the license requirements before we'll issue the credential. And with renewals, where we have been more flexible and understanding is with any of the late fees, any of those types of fees that might be due based on the circumstances. But yes, from an administrative standpoint, when we are talking about the thousands of license holders, the case by case does pose challenges if we are flooded with those requests, because then they do require review by an individual, each one of those requests. As far as the renewal extensions, I think, Chelsea, do you mind speaking to the limitations there?
I'll give you an example of how we absolutely do not want to say, oh, sorry, tough, it's all over, we're back to normal. To your point, Mr. Renfro, we're very far from in a normal environment. The tension seems to be where someone wants to kind of live within their preferences instead of having a struggle that we can help accommodate. Our level of being flexible when someone says, I just like to take my CE in person, there won't be CE in person for a long time. And so that's something that we really can't accommodate in this environment. The world cannot accommodate that in this environment. However, we did have an individual come to us saying, I have a visual impairment that makes working on a computer significantly challenging. And so I cannot do these online courses. What are my other options? And this was on the Trek side, but I think the example holds. And so our education team was able to find a couple of correspondence, like old school mail correspondence options for that individual so that he could complete his education in an accommodating manner, but get it done. And he needed some extra time to do that. So we waived the deferral fee for him. So we are very willing to work with folks on how to accomplish what needs happening, but we are living in the tension between, we have essential workers who need to be educated, and so the push and pull that comes with that. But I also wanted to mention there are some numbers relating to our renewal figures on page 85 of your materials. This is the dip we're talking about. I think it will be much less dramatic once we have more information. So there may be questions related to that information, but this is what we were really pointing you to in terms of the dip.
Okay,
Chelsea, apologize. If I may add, to Mr. Renfro's request, we should be able to get you those ballpark estimates. Obviously for reports that we're publishing on the web, we definitely don't want to throw ballpark numbers out there, but we can definitely gather and get you an estimate of how many of those license holders took advantage of the extensions. Because of the way we extended the licenses, we did it towards the end of the month to allow as much time for those license holders who were ready to renew timely to go ahead and renew before we, added the flag saying, okay, this license is now extended to July. So I should be able to get you those rough numbers, and I'm happy to share those with you at mid to late next week, if that works for you.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that was a little bit troubling to me is a person who renewed in March was given the same amount of time to renew as a person who renewed in June. In other words, if I renewed in March of this year, I had 120 days to get my license to you. And if I renewed in June, I had a 30-day extension. So maybe the way we went about it was a little bit, I know we did what we did because we had to do something, and we were acting and we were having to make decisions in a time that we'd never experienced. I get that. But a rolling 30-day extension, something like that, where not everybody who was renewing from March to June was going to wait till the end of July. That was what was troubling me, because what we did was we effectively created a tidal wave. If everybody took advantage and everybody waited to July, then I don't know what the numbers are we're talking about, but you get you're going to get like a tidal wave effect. But if you have something like a rolling 30-day, then we can all we really lost was 30 days, and we can stay on top of this. We're just giving everybody a little bit of flexibility to recognize that the environment in which we were getting our education has changed, and it's a little bit different. I understand that maybe we will never go back to personal classes, although I find that hard to believe. I do know that I have been questioned already twice as if I would be willing to attend something this fall. Now, that was before the numbers surged again this summer, and I'm sure everybody has rethought that. But my point was some idea like a rolling 30-day extension until we get this whole thing resolved, and we're sure that education can be obtained remotely, and we're sure that most of our stakeholders are comfortable with that kind of a process. Something like that, I think, might be beneficial. I'm not proposing what we did here previously, because what we did here previously, and I'm not trying to be discredit what we did. We had to do something. I understand that, and I understand that maybe over on the Trek side, the impact could be much more significant than it is on our side. But I only operate on this side, and so something like a rolling 30-day extension, where each month you get 30 days. Would keep us from something like we're fixing to face, I think.
Yeah, I like that idea, if that's something that we can do, because I think that you're right, Mr. Renfro, and that some people are used to taking, I know that this certain class they offer every April, and that's what I had planned, but it's not going to happen. And so now I'm kind of scrambling to make it happen. Is that a possibility, Commissioner?
We need to do some examination of that. We had to, in order to offer extensions, we worked very closely with the governor's office, who waived the rules necessary to allow that to happen. Okay. And so we remain in close contact with them and have notified them that we have ended those extensions. Okay. So it may be. We would need to get our legal ducks in a row on our end, and then take that to the governor's office for their consideration. They have come to us to say, do you still need these waivers of rules? Where are you in the process? And we have allowed some of those to expire because we discontinued the extensions as of the end of July. So there are some moving parts that we would need to work out on that front, but we can look into it.
How about this? How about we ask the Education Committee to hold a meeting after we have the data, so that we can see, is this a problem that needs a solution, or is it not a problem? And then we go from there and let staff do their digging before we go and ask for a blanket 30-day rolling extension. Just kind of let everybody gather some more information, but let's put something on the calendar so that it can be addressed sooner than the next board meeting, and maybe task the Education Committee with that. Does that sound like a solution for everybody here?
Good idea.
I think that's a good idea. So it sounds to me that we have two options on the table. One being the 30-day roll. The second being eliminate the extensions, but allow the appraisers maybe online to request an extension only if needed. It sounds like those are the two proposed options. Am I correct?
Well, if I may speak on a couple of things, I apologize for interrupting, but I think in terms of the 30-day roll, the reason why that may not have been utilized, and this is not an excuse, it's just the unfortunate fact, is there's limitations in our system to do that get complicated. They complicate things on the tail end of things when we go back to roll things out if we do things. That's not to say we can't do it. It's just in terms of the complexity of doing something like that, it just becomes exponential. So having a bright line in the sand makes things, I understand the fairness issue you raised, Buster, but that puts things, it complicates things overall for the whole system. That's not to say we can't look into it, but I just wanted to throw that out there. And just so that you understand this, Mr. Robinson, the extension has already expired. So if we were to look into that, it would need to be having another date out in the future, because the extension expired on January 31st.
Yeah, that is good. That's a good point, in the sense of, like, we've had 5 months to know that there's no in-person classes. So maybe the expectation should have been that you already figured that out, as opposed to putting us into this administrative nightmare that Tony's talking about. And my understanding is that then your next it really messes it up for your next renewal, because now did you renew July 31st? Did you renew August 31st when you're normally on that? And then it pushes an entire group of people into one day, which creates a burden for years to come, kind of thing.
And the other issue is, unfortunately, when we did the Harvey thing, we were dealing with specific counties, so the population was smaller. This was a statewide issue, and it really, in terms of having numbers that we feel confident and are accurate to report, I think that's why Denise was saying we needed to wait till August to kind of get that cleaned up, because we're still in the process a week ago of moving some of those extension dates back to their original expiration date. And it was something that we don't do. I mean, we don't do this very often. So it was new to us in terms of how do we figure this out. So there was a little bit of thinking on the fly. As much as we could try to think things through moving forward, issues popped up that we didn't expect.
So with us stopping it on July 31st in terms of the extension, in the interim until the education committee meets again, is it possible to put something online to give, if they need an extension, they may request it so many days prior to their expiration date? Just start doing it on a case-by-case basis while we're waiting on the data about the rolling 30 days and all of that. Is there something we can address immediately to help people that are still in difficult times? Like if we don't have an extension right now, can we post something where it's saying, hey, we've stopped the extensions, but in the interim, for the short-term period, we'd like to still help our appraisers. If you want an extension, it's going to be reviewed case by case. Please submit this application, and we'll notify you within, whatever the appropriate time frame is, if it's been approved.
Maybe just make some sort of something that says we have flexibility, so that
or something so they know.
Because we don't want to then do that. Okay, whoever wants an extension can get an extension, because then everybody will file an extension. So maybe if there's some way to say that, somewhere in small print, but for the people who are looking for it, that really need it, there is some flexibility. I don't know if that makes sense, but
we don't want everybody calling at one time. We put something out there and then our phones are overloaded, our emails are overloaded, and then back to responding.
So maybe staff, if y'all could think of some way to do that, that's not going to then make everybody do an automatic extension, but
I can tell you that I have never known our license holders to be shy about calling and asking. Where anyone has an inconvenience or a need, we tend to get a lot of those calls. That's just, hey, I have this particular issue. Is there any way that you can help me overcome it? And one way in which I'm very proud of our staff is the collective approach involved in finding solutions for those individuals. So I think you are exactly right that if we invite this type of request, then we may see more than may be needed.
Okay.
But we will be very quick to accommodate in every area of flexibility that the law allows.
And I meet every morning with Robert, who runs the contact center, and ask him about issues that pop up. And to be honest with you, the issue with the extension, while it was the contact center was busy early on because of a flood of people trying to make sure that they met that extension or whatever, we have not had any conversations about license holders calling routinely saying, I can't meet this. We've had a few who talk about the fees and issues with paying the fees, and we've addressed those, as Denise said, on a case-by-case basis. We have flexibility on whether or not we waive those fees or not. But we haven't heard, and I can ask once you guys go into executive session, I can go back and ask to make sure that's the case. I don't want to give you misinformation, but as far as our daily conversations go, that has not been an issue that we've had license holders calling up saying that they're having issues with getting education outside of what Chelsea mentioned with the preference question.
Is there a way to be? Is there a way to be? Oh, excuse me.
Mr. Renfro?
Tony, that's good to know. That's good to know. And so the extension was through July 31st, and today we're on August 21st. So I'm just going to ask, have you received a wave of renewals come in after July that took advantage of this extension? I mean, the listening to the discussion, I would have thought you would have all of a sudden got a huge influx of renewals coming in. Have you experienced that?
Well,
Denise, can you speak to that?
Yeah, I don't want to give any incorrect information, so I'm searching for our latest status report, because we do weekly just kind of give a snapshot in licensing of how many renewals we are processing. And we did process more renewals across all license types at the end of July. So because we don't process them real time, we were still processing them on August 1st, 2nd, or, into those first few business days of August. But, I don't have hard numbers right in front of me, but I can get those.
Okay, thank you. The other thing is this, and Chelsea, you were kind of headed this way. I think administratively, it would be a nightmare to publicize that on an individual basis, you can call or give us some information to prove to us why you need an extension. All I'm suggesting is that until we get some kind of real normal pattern of where we're going to be for the long run, that you as a staff, as a board, understand there may be difficulties in obtaining this education, and that we afford whatever flexibility we legally can. That's what I was trying to say, is that we need to still remain flexible. We gave them a huge extension to start with, but it only applied to those people who renewed for those 3 months. But moving forward, people who still need to renew, I think, are still going to have some difficulties possibly in getting the education they need, because it isn't the way we used to do it. Because Sarah was right, and I'm a victim of it. I had certain organizations that offered classes every fall, every spring, and those were the ones I went to. So I could count on those hours and would never have difficulty in getting the hours I needed. All of those classes got canceled. And so, now I'm forced with doing stuff remotely or online, which isn't my favorite choice. I like to go out and see people and network and learn what's going on in the industry and get badgered about what the TALC board is or isn't doing. So, I just say we need to remain flexible. That's all my real point was.
Well, and also, Buster, just so you're aware, we have actually gone that extra step of trying to help specific people find classes if they're not able to do it. And as Chelsea mentioned, that one instance where the person had the issue with their eyesight, and we were able to find a solution through a correspondence course that met their needs. So we do actually, we are trying to be as understanding and flexible as possible on this case-by-case basis as they come up.
That's
you have
excellent.
a high commitment.
Excellent.
Good, and I hope we remain that way.
Okay, so the plan going forward is we've asked staff to continue to be flexible and help license holders where necessary, possibly make some sort of notation somewhere about the flexibility, and then have the education committee look at the numbers when they come back and see if there is something that we need to do differently, do a 30-day rolling, something like that, but to kind of dive into that once we have that information. And maybe also, Tony, for the education committee, to be able to give them some real examples of anybody who has needed an extension. That way, if it is a big problem, that we can do, one solution to tackle a bunch of different.
Well, and I think having a better understanding of what's available out there and to what extent it is available, I think will help as well. So we'll look into that as well in terms of that issue.
Very good. Does anyone?
Can I add one thing? We brought up the issue of individual who was visually impaired. On that note, I know that Texas Workforce Vocational Rehab Program has assistive technology resources for people who are disabled. If those calls come in, if we can direct them to that agency for immediate assistance, since they are now considered essential, that would be helpful because they can get immediate technology to take their online courses. So just if we can keep that in mind, that would be good.
It's a very good point. Thank you for that.
Okay. No problem. You're welcome.
And y'all can reach out to Ms. Robinson to help you connect those dots.
Absolutely.
To
Happy to help coordinate that.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. And we appreciate that. We appreciate that knowledge.
Absolutely.
Certainly.
Yeah. Absolutely.
From staff reports, I did want to mention that when you look at pages 96 and 97 in the staff reports, that there, let me pull mine up. So that's our sort of accounting on experience audits. And what's not included in the board materials, but for anybody who's listening in the public, I would invite you to look at the last enforcement committee meeting materials, probably from July. There's sort of more detailed information from that. And so when you look at these pages in the board materials that say that the average processing time of audits, so for fiscal year 20, it shows 132 days for commercial and 39 for residential. But if you look in the enforcement committee meeting materials, you can sort of see that we're coming towards the end of our fiscal year, and so that those numbers are weighted down by things that were happening at the beginning of the year. And so just to kind of give a little bit from the enforcement committee meeting materials. So in April, the number of audits closed, commercial experience audits, they took on an average of about 42 days. May, we had 34 days, and June, we had 37. So that number that you're seeing there, that's 132, that's not what's happening right now. And so I definitely want to commend the enforcement division for that. And I wanted to highlight that since it's not in our meeting materials today. Does anybody else have any other questions on staff reports?
I just have a comment, and that I think we are so going in the right direction, and I'm pleased to see all the progress. And I think with the enforcement changes that are coming up, it just shows a positive trend, just extremely positive, in a bad time even. So thank you.
Very good. Did anyone else? Anything from staff reports? Okay, so to mention again, agenda item number 13, which is executive session, we're going to push that back till after agenda item number 16. So now we will move on to agenda item number 14. As a reminder, these are rules that were discussed at the last board meeting and have been published in the Texas Register for public comment. We didn't receive any public comments on either of them, and so they are here before the board today for adoption. So we will hear any discussion or a motion. Anyone have any questions on these rules?
Just maybe, discuss what the rules pertaining to, and the criminal history and fitness determination, and just.
Sure, I think Kat.
It's in our notes, our meeting notes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Good morning, everyone.
I want to say that, well, I'll go ahead and is Kat ready to speak on these? Or
yes, Madam Chair, I'm here.
Awesome, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Kathleen Santos, General Counsel. I'm here this morning to present agenda item number 14A. This is discussion and possible action to adopt amendments to Chapter 153, 22 Texas Administrative Code, Section 153.19. Licensings for persons with criminal history and fitness determination. So the amendments in this rule today correct a reference within the rule. There's no real substantive changes. As Madam Chair mentioned, we did not receive any comments on the amendments as proposed. Staff's recommendation today is to authorize staff on behalf of the board to submit for adoption amendments to 22 TAC Section 153.19 as published, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for adoption.
Madam
Okay.
Chair, I move that the board approve the staff's recommendation.
I second.
We have a motion by Mr. Bolton and a second by Ms. Reed Lynch. Is there any other further discussion or questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Is anyone
Aye.
opposed? Is anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Ms. Santos, the agenda 14B.
Sure, thank you. Agenda item number 14B, discussion and possible action to adopt amendments to Chapter 153, 22 Texas Administrative Code, Section 153.24 in complaint processing. So the amendments here specify who can sign an agreed order in lieu of the chair of the board, should the chair not be available or need to recuse him or herself. As with the other amendment, we did not receive any comments on this amendment as proposed. Staff's recommendation today is to authorize staff on behalf of the board to submit for adoption amendments to 22 TAC Section 153.24 as published, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for adoption.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, Jim.
I move that the board approve the staff's recommendations.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Jeffries and a second by Mr. Pena. Very good. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? What was that? Somebody voting against? Just a noise. Okay, very good. The motion passes unanimously. That then takes us on to agenda item number 15A, discussion and possible actions to propose amendments to Chapter 153. On 153.11, Ms. Robinson would like to introduce that one.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the proposed amendment reduced the number of hours of additional education needed when a test taker or an applicant fails an exam 3 times. We also work to clarify the type of education that they would need to take. So just to back up a little bit, several months ago, we had 3 young ladies that were able to testify in front of our board that all 3 had concerns regarding failing the exam and then having the additional burden of having to take 30 additional hours in order to retake the exam. One thing that I know that our board takes very seriously is the governor's task that he has given us to make sure that we are looking at our rules and regulations to reduce the barriers for economic growth in our state for our appraisers. And so as a result of that, we as an education committee have come together, as well as with the team members, with our staff, and have come up with a solution to where we are no longer requiring the 30 additional hours of training before that test is taken. We have now reduced those to 15 hours of training based on staff recommendations, which they did an incredible job on recommending a plan of action to do that, as well as identifying the courses that could be taken within those 15 hours to help the test takers in that state. What this has done is it's reduced the barriers to entry in our industry, which is what we've been tasked to do by our governor. And it's also helped our future appraisers to get into the industry at a lower cost. So I'm very proud of the work that the committee has done. I'm extremely thankful for the hard work of the staff who contributed to coming up with the proposed 15-hour plan. And if those young ladies are watching, those 3 young ladies that came up, I know at the time when they presented, they were nervous and they were hesitant to come in front of the board. But I was so proud that they did, because it was because of their voice and them speaking up that this has become a forefront issue. So ladies, if you're watching, well done. Change has been made as a result of your participation. So Madam Chair, I would like to move that the board approve staff recommendations to reduce the training hours from 30 to 15 hours as it relates to the examination.
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve the staff's recommendation.
I'll second.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Absolutely.
Madam Chair? Madam
I
Chair?
apologize, I was on mute. Yes, sir, Mr. Jeffries.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
Stephanie identified all the real important issues and gave it great coverage. I would also like to add that one of the important changes in this proposed legislation, or this proposed item that we have this morning, is that the qualifying education changed in the original language from core education to qualifying education. So it's no longer core, and that is a tremendous and important change that we put in there.
Absolutely.
Very good. And I certainly appreciate the Education Committee for taking this up and finding a solution and working with staff and Jennifer Wheeler and her department for figuring out how to change, and also Ms. Santos for figuring out that we needed the difference between core and qualifying, and identifying classes that fit that specific number of hours, so that what we were asking was actually something that could happen out in the real world. This was definitely a collaborative effort. Mr. Renfro, although not on the Education Committee, this was something that he was very passionate about, and so this was a full board effort, and I certainly appreciate it. And although it looks like, when you look at the rule change, it looks like a very minor change, I think it's hugely impactful, and so it's work that I'm proud that the board did. So we have a motion by Mrs. Reed Lynch and a second by
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a few comments before we vote on the motion.
Sure.
Just to update everybody, the three ladies who did have courage to come before and talk to us at the last board meeting that Stephanie was referencing, I'm pleased to announce that all three of those ladies finally were successful in passing the exam. As you know, for one of them, it was her sixth time.
Bravo.
One of the ladies, it was her sixth time. One of the girls who worked for me, it was her third time, and she was very nervous about having to go take these 30 core hours. And then the other young lady, she passed on her second time. But regretfully, I do have to report that one of my other trainees took it for the first time in July and was not successful, and it surprised me because she has put in just an enormous number of hours in preparing for that exam, and was pretty heartbroken that she failed. And she's preparing to take it again at the end of this month, and so she's putting in a lot of hours again. And so we still have some issues with regard to the exam and or the education that prepares these individuals for the exam. And so I applaud the committee for working on this issue. I applaud them for noticing and addressing the issue between qualifying hours and core hours, which is probably a lot more important than it is. And so thank you for your hard work.
Very good. I appreciate that clarification, Mr. Renfro, this doesn't end our work on this issue, that this is something that we will continue to monitor and try and influence in any way that we can in a positive way. So we have a motion by Mrs. Reed Lynch and a second by Mr. Bolton. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Very good. The motion passes unanimously. Agenda item number 15B, Ms. Wheeler is going to introduce that for us.
Yes. Hello, Madam Chair and board members. Agenda item 15B is discussion and possible action to propose amendments to 22 TAC 153.18 regarding Appraiser Continuing Education, or ACE. The proposed amendments clarify requirements for receiving ACE credit and allow an appraiser to request ACE credit for a course taken outside of Texas, provided that the course is approved by the AQB or another state appraiser regulatory agency. The amendments also eliminate references to ACE requirements that expired on August 31st, 2019. If there are no questions, staff recommends that you authorize staff on behalf of the board to submit amendments to 22 TAC 153.18 as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes required for proposal.
Jennifer, can you tell me this change where it started, what it stems from?
Sure. Well, part of it is a cleanup, which is removing all the references to the pre-September 1, 2019 changes that accommodated the new Appraiser education program here at the board. And the other is primarily to allow our appraisers, our Texas appraisers, many of whom hold licenses in other states as well. And this is to allow them to request credit for continuing education that they may have taken to satisfy their appraiser renewal requirements in another state. And this allows us the flexibility to review and award credit for those courses.
And very good. So that was not allowed previously.
Right.
Okay, so it had to have been approved in your state, in your home state, in order for you to, and does the AQB have rules around that?
So the AQB gives us that flexibility.
Okay.
They require the courses either to be approved by them or a state appraiser regulatory agency. So the changes that we've made here align with what the AQB allows for, and just gives our appraisers a little bit more flexibility.
Absolutely, that's a great change.
I'm a little bit confused. Maybe you can explain this to me, because we have a lot of Appraisal Institute members that take their education throughout the country. But they're, if I'm correct, regardless of the state they took it, if it was approved, then they received credit, continuing education credit already.
And the Appraisal Institute really has the majority of their courses approved by the AQB. So they haven't, there's been a non-issue.
So regardless where they take it, if it's approved, it's still approved.
That's exactly right.
Because the way this reads, it's as if you didn't take it in Texas, you didn't get credit for it before.
Right, which is not always the case. This is just granting that little bit of extra flexibility. Again, with the Appraisal Institute and their mass membership, they send most of their courses, I would probably venture to guess at least 95% of their courses to the AQB to get approved. And so we've always had a mechanism for approving anything that the AQB has approved.
Okay, regardless of what state you ever took it in.
Right. Right.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that particular aspect, because we weren't exactly sure on that one.
Okay, understood.
Okay.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any other questions for Jennifer? Very good. I will hear a motion.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Jeffries.
Yes, this is a good one for us, and I move that the board approve staff's recommendation.
Second.
I will second it.
That we have a motion by Mr. Jeffries and a second by Mrs. Reed Lynch. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion passes unanimously. That takes us to agenda item number 16, an update regarding the request for Attorney General opinion. This is in your materials on page 119, I believe, and Ms. Santos will be giving us this update.
Good morning again, everybody. Yeah, I just wanted to give everyone a brief update on where we are on the request for the Attorney General opinion. As you recall, at the last meeting on May 15th, the board voted to request an Attorney General opinion as to whether the TALCB may adopt a rule exempting licensed appraisers from the statutory requirements to comply with USPAP when performing an evaluation. That letter with the edits that you directed us to make was sent out on May 20th and was received by the Attorney General's office on May 28th. They designated our request number 0355-KP if anyone wants to look it up based on that reference. Now, the Attorney General's office has a deadline of no later than 180 days from when they receive a request to issue their opinion, and so that deadline date is November 24th. Additionally, they requested any interested parties to submit any briefing on the topic, and they accepted briefing through June 30th. And as far as our office is aware, they received comments from the Appraisal Institute and the Real Estate Valuation Advocacy Association. And so, and we're just going to keep you all aware of anything that comes up between now and November 24th. Just want to give you a brief update.
Very good. Does anybody have any questions or Ms. Santos about that? So it sounds like we will get that hopefully before our November board meeting, but it's due right after. So, so maybe not, but we will keep an eye out for that. Very good. Okay, so now is the time that we will go back to agenda item number 13, which is the executive session. So the time is 11:47, and the board will now go into executive session to obtain the advice of legal counsel or discuss pending or contemplated litigation, including settlement offers and enforcement actions pursuant to Texas Government Code 551071 and personnel matters pursuant to Texas Government Code 551074. We anticipate returning, let me see, at in approximately an hour and 20 minutes. So that would put us at 1:10. Is that, did I make that calculation correct? So as a reminder to the board members, you will leave this meeting, and there is a separate meeting that you should have gotten from Dion that you will join. So we will recess for 10 minutes. So at noon, we will then all join back up in the executive session. Does anybody have any questions? Very good. We will see you all in about 10 minutes. Time is 1:15, and the board is back from executive session and reconvening in open session. We will pick back up with agenda item number 17, and I believe that Renata is going to speak to this item.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'm Renata Williams. I'm the Director of Finance, and will begin by addressing agenda item 17, which is discussion and possible action regarding the budget and investment policy. These items are included in your meeting materials and start on page 127. As the Budget Committee Chair, Mr. Pena, mentioned during his report, the Budget Committee did meet on July 16th and were presented a revised version of the budget and investment policy, which seeks to clarify the expectations and processes of the Commission in regards to how we administer the budget and investments of this agency. There were not entirely a lot that was changed since the introduced version of the policy at the May 15th board meeting. Key highlights of the budget policy are a timeline of events with specific dates was removed, but rather key milestones and targets are in place, and it retains the same cadence of providing 2 draft budgets. Staff will also report expenses which exceed a 10% budget variance or $20,000 for budget committee approval. The budget policy authorizes a reserve fund for operations and contingencies, and it shall carry a balance that can accommodate 3 months of projected operational expenses. The investment policy was also revised to ensure that key components that are required by the Texas Public Funds Investment Act are included in our local investment policy. And those components include things such as the scope, prudence, objectives of our investments, delegation of authority, the training requirements, reporting, safekeeping, investment strategy, our authorized investments, account balances, and expenses. This concludes my presentation regarding agenda item 17, and if there are no questions, staff recommends that the budget and investment policy be adopted as presented.
Does anybody have any questions for Renata? If not, then I will hear a motion.
Madam Chair, this is Clayton. I move that the board approve staff's recommendations as presented.
A second.
We have a motion by Mr. Black and a second by Mr. Bolton. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion passes unanimously. That takes us to agenda item number 18, discussion and possible action regarding the fiscal year 2021 budget. And again, Renata will speak to this one.
Yes, ma'am. Agenda item 18 is discussion and possible action regarding the FY 2021 budget. And those materials can be found in your meeting materials beginning on page 137. As previously discussed, the Budget Committee met on July 16th and was presented a revised budget. The key highlights include a change in the format to include an executive summary, budget highlights, revenue and expenditure overview, a total beginning balance, a clear delineation of our operations and contingency reserves, and our operational deficit and gains. We also included information regarding staffing and a 5-year revenue trend analysis. This concludes my presentation regarding agenda item 18. And if there are no questions, staff recommends that the FY 2021 budget be adopted as presented.
Does anybody have any questions for Renata or the Budget Committee? I know that they delved into this pretty deeply in the last Budget Committee meeting, so I appreciate that effort.
Am I reading this right, that we have a projected revenue or proposed revenue of $1,598,000, and then we have proposed expenses of $2,131,000?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes. Yes, sir. That is correct. Our projected revenue is the $1,998,000 approximately. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's a $500,000 deficit.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and so one of the things that's key that we notice here in 20 versus 21. So in 21, or in the odd years, there's a reduction in revenue that is generally collected because of the AMC fees. And that's normally made up, in the even years once we have the renewals. We do recognize that we are operating in a deficit, and the goal and the direction and guidance given to us by the Budget Committee was to identify ways to have a more balanced budget and not to continue to operate with an operational deficit utilizing the reserves that we had on hand.
I want to add just one piece to that for just one bit of context, and that is there has been extra funds. I don't know why I can't think of the correct word for that. With the direction to spend down those funds, right? And so there has been an intention to spend more than our current revenue brings in, to spend down those funds, knowing that that is unsustainable. So over the course of the next year, we have work to do to ensure sustainability and to make sure that we're living within our means. But there was a deliberate decision before Renata's and my time to spend down that excess before, of course, as you know.
The building fund, and I understand that. I just want to, and I understand that's not the whole budget picture, just revenue and expenses. But I just want to point that out, that is, you make a very good point that we've got some work to do in reducing our budget if that's what our revenue is.
Right. So we identified what are the ongoing expenses, what are one-time expenses, what needs to be reduced from the ongoing expenses, and to ensure responsibility. Right.
And just to add to that, being on the Budget Committee, we are very well aware of that deficit, and that it was a major priority for us in our last meeting, is that we have to get that under control. And I think the staff as well as the committee is very committed to that. This is the budget that we present today just because that's what we have. But that does not mean that throughout the fiscal year of next fiscal year that we will not be looking for opportunities to reduce that and get more balance. So we recognize that as an issue, and we're going to be doing everything we can next fiscal year to make that more balanced.
And you'll see, Chance, 2 years ago, it was 420. And that's just a reflection of two things. One being the AMC fees coming in alternate years. And then the other is just the increase in expenditures related to salaries and other things that we approved to kind of get everything in line. I think it will start to trend downward as things settle and we see the results. But for now, that's correct.
Okay, well, and that makes sense to me. I mean, we intentionally threw a bunch of money at the problems that we had, and it sounds like that, Renata and her staff, as well as the budget committee, understand that, and that's something that's the challenge in the coming year to tackle.
Yes, sir.
That's right. And in addition to that, we are also tackling to make sure if there's anything that we can do possible to decrease the appraisal fees, we're going to try to do that as well. So both of those issues are high priorities to look for ways of saving so that we can focus on budget balancing as well as reducing the appraisal fees.
Why for the budget for 2021 is there not an AMC carry forward?
And ma'am, and that's just we've changed the format. So the AMC carry forward is actually all shown in the projected beginning balance. So as opposed to showing 247,000 in a separate line item, we're essentially doing away with that, and we're just showing complete transparency. This is the total amount that we have to begin with. This is how much we need to set aside for our operating reserves, and then everything else is essentially our working capital. So the money is going to be there. It's just captured in the projected beginning balance, which is that top line.
Let's see. Okay.
It's more of a statement of cash flows, and that's how we translated it this time, Sarah. It is different, but it's more about what's in the bank at the beginning and what's at the end.
Very good. Good to know. Would that, if that AMC revenue carry forward changed dramatically, how would we know that? You see what I'm saying? Like, so like for 2018, it's 320, and then 19, 320, and then it drops down to 250,000 in 2020. So, in some way that might need to be reported just from the standpoint of that's a significant part of our revenue, and if we don't, well, I guess we would see it in the AMC.
We keep tracking the AMC fees at the top.
I see, so right.
That's where we'll see if there's any deviation in that.
I got you. So you would really need to just take each 2 year and divide it by 2 to kind of see the trend. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. And we can continue to fine tune the final product to make sure that everyone is presented material that is beneficial and gives them what they're looking for. So I will continue to work with the format and along with the budget committee and present them various ideas to see what works best for us.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Are there any other questions? If not, then I'll hear a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve staff's recommendations. The budget.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Reed Lynch and a second by Mr. Black. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Renata. We appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am.
That takes us to agenda item number 19, which is the discussion and possible action regarding the application for ASC grant funds. And I believe, is Troy the one going to speak to this, Commissioner?
I believe that's a Renata item.
Oh, okay. Very good.
There she is.
Very good. One thing that I wanted to note before Renata kind of delves into it is I looked into where we were on all the ASC stuff, and I wanted to bring this to the board's attention as we make any decisions that are maybe multi-year projects. So the ASC has reported the AMC registry revenue. You're on camera. And it's about double what their original projections were at this point of $5 to $6 million. So the House has passed legislation. Remember, there was an effort maybe to get the $25 per panelist lowered. So that did pass the House, as we had already talked about, but it's still sitting in the Senate. And now that they've recessed, it's probably going to be the next Congress before that gets taken up, which means that between that possibly changing and any then subsequent rules to that, we're probably 2, 3, maybe even longer years away from that changing. So when we had talked about before, let's not agree to do any multi-year projects that all of a sudden that revenue is going to dry up and we're halfway through the project and we can't finish it because we don't have the money to do it. I don't think that that's a huge problem right now, but that is something that we want to watch for as we go forward. And maybe even if we have any big projects that we want to submit grants for, now is the time where we know we probably have 2 or 3 years of that grant. Those grant funds are probably more certain than as we go on. The other thing that I was told by people who are tracking this nationally is that all the states aren't going to apply for grants because it's a process and you have to really have the expertise to do that. And so we know they have a ton of money and not everybody's going to ask for it. So that's something else to consider.
Yeah. It appears to be coming at a very good time.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll pass it over to Renata from here.
Okay. Agenda item 19 is discussion regarding the application for the ASC grant. The Appraisal Subcommittee, ASC, is accepting applications from states for cost reimbursement grants to improve the appraiser regulatory process. The grants will be funded for 3 years with funding provided on an annual basis. The ASC anticipates awarding up to $120,000 per year to each successful applicant. Applications are accepted on a rolling quarterly deadline, with the first deadline already passed, which was August 17th of 2020. Staff completed the application on August 13th and submitted it, and is requesting funding to support technology and system enhancements for TALCB as recommended by the Budget Committee.
Is there a limit on the amount of money that we request?
Yes, ma'am. It's $120,000 is the max that each state can request each year.
And that's not per project, that's in total?
That's in total, yes, ma'am.
That's interesting, okay.
And we requested $120,000.
Very good.
Right.
We send money to the federal government, then we ask for it back. Does anybody have any questions for Renata on that? Okay. When do we expect a decision from them?
Now that I am not sure of when they anticipate making a decision. I do know that they have the rolling quarterly deadlines. I believe in one of the webinars that they presented that they would like to have their first award start October 1st, which is in line with the federal fiscal year. But again, that was presented in a webinar and we don't know for certain. We just know that we made the initial deadline, the first deadline of August 17th for consideration for first funding.
Very good.
And so on this, we're asking for it to go towards the technology that's listed on the second page of our notes, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so this is all something that we've already decided how we would spend it, correct?
Yes, ma'am. So we presented this to the Budget Committee and we gave them a menu of options to choose from. And we let them tell us, staff, what should be our priority and what our focus should be. And they were in agreement that we should spend the funding towards technology enhancements for the application user portal or for the complaint portal and things of that nature, as opposed to other items that were presented to the
I think this is great. I think this will help us in all areas. But if we don't get the $120,000 grant, are we going to still be doing this enhancement to our technology anyway?
I would have to defer to Steve with that one.
Well, and I'll speak up. I'll say not on the current, not on the same timeline, and it's not currently budgeted, and that's for a couple of reasons. We couldn't, in our application, you can't apply for grant funds for things you're already planning or already doing or already planning to do. They had to be like an enhanced type of thing. So staff brainstormed what would be that type of enhancement and what would be of benefit to the agency and license holders by, receiving this money. And that's where we ended up. But and that's also the reason why it's already been decided, is that it needed to be included in the application for vetting to determine whether or not we'd receive those funds.
Excellent. Happy with this.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And the thought process behind, I think, our decision when we looked at the different options proposed was we wanted to make sure we were investing in things that would streamline our agency and make it more efficient. So that's why we chose the technology route.
Stephanie, I think you might be double mic'd by the phone and the computer, because we're hearing twice of everything.
Oh, my apologies. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
Can we hear you now?
I'm telling you, I'm having technical difficulties. Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Yes.
Very good.
Yes.
Sorry. So if you repeat that.
What's that?
If you wouldn't mind repeating what you just said.
Oh, absolutely. So when we were presented with the different options for this particular grant, we decided to choose the technology option simply because it would allow us as an agency to be more productive and streamlined, with the hopes of that improving our processes and lowering our cost. So there were several great ideas, but this is the one that we felt would be more financially beneficial for the agency in terms of being a little bit more streamlined internally.
It may save us money as well in our budget with reduction of expenses and people doing the same jobs.
Absolutely. That was our hope.
Yes.
Very good.
Okay.
So does anybody else have any other questions for Renata about the grant process or application? This doesn't necessarily require any action by the board. So moving on to agenda item number 20, report on internal audit plan for fiscal year 2021. And if y'all will direct me to who will be introducing this.
Madam Chair, I can introduce this.
Very good. Thank you, Renata.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. So agenda item 20 is discussion regarding the internal audit plan for 2021. And a copy of that plan is found in your materials on page 151. At the TREC August 10th commission meeting, they approved the 2021 internal audit plan, which was presented by McConnell and Jones. The items that are the subject of the audit plan affect both TREC and TALCB and will assist the agency in becoming better compliant, knowing where our weaknesses are as a whole. No action is required for this agenda item, and we just wanted to make sure that you were aware that the 2021 audit plan had been approved, and those were the items that were going to be covered.
Very good. Does anybody have any questions about the audit plan? Very good. That takes us to agenda item number 21. Discussion and possible action regarding the recommendations from the Enforcement Committee regarding first the removal of the initial work file requirement from the experience audits. I'll go ahead and let Mr. Bolton handle this A, B, and C of this agenda item.
Well, okay, so with A, as was just said, we took we as a committee directed staff or supported staff removing the work file requirement from the audit, and they did that. And according to what I'm seeing in the materials, that significantly reduced the amount of time it takes to perform an audit. I think at this point, with regard to that, I think we should, as a board, move to codify that into our rules. As of right now, it is a staff decision, or it's actually the commissioner's decision to remove that requirement. But I think if we as a board support that, then we should codify it.
And how might we word that in a motion or in a rule change?
Well, I think it's pretty simple. It's just there is a provision that says that the audit requires an appraisal and the work file, and I think you just take that out or modify the language to say that the work file is not initially required, but staff may request it if necessary.
Okay. That sounds good.
So maybe we ask staff to take some wording for a rule change back to the enforcement committee the next time that the enforcement committee meets in order to make that happen so that we make this a permanent change.
Okay.
I'd be more than happy to take that on.
Thank you, sir.
So there's no real motion here, I guess. Or do we need to vote that that's?
I think we just direct staff. I think that will work. Just ask
Okay,
staff.
and then when we bring it, we'll bring the language back for approval.
Right.
Okay. So on item 21B, discussion of possible action regarding process change to notify supervisor appraisers of board communication with appraiser trainees. So this is the same thing. We've been talking about it several times today, and my discussions with staff, principally Tony Slagle, Deputy Commissioner, is that we've worked out a way that can be done. It may not be perfect yet, but we can make that change. And correct me if I'm wrong, Commissioner, but that can be done through agency policy. However, I would like to codify that as well. And I think that we follow the same process that we just talked about, that let's develop some language, bring it to the enforcement committee, and then the committee will make a recommendation to the board.
Great. Very good. And I just as a reminder, I wanted to remind the stakeholders that this was something that came about during when we had our last chair at the last September meeting, after there was testimony by a respondent, and that came from this. And so we've been slowly trying to figure out how to make that happen, both from a due process standpoint and from a technology standpoint. And so it's been on the enforcement committee's agenda for a while, and we are getting closer and closer to making that happen.
I would like to ask Chelsea, or if Tony, if you can answer this, when can you begin to start implementing this internal policy?
Chelsea, do you want to go ahead?
You have run lead on this project. You should get the glory.
Well, I don't know about that. So we have just very quickly, we have two ways we communicate with trainees, and that one is a manual process and one is a system generated process. The manual process is a fairly easy thing to do in terms of just looking up the supervisory appraisers and CCing them on any email that we send out to them. There does need to be some testing on the system generated process to make sure that we can import the supervisory appraiser contact information into the CC and make sure that works properly. So if we want to do it sort of all together, probably looking at end of September, maybe early October, we could probably implement the the manual process sooner if that's the direction the board wants to go. And this is all on the licensing end of things. On the enforcement end of things, that's also manual, so that's something that could be implemented fairly well. We just need to make sure that we're covering all of our bases there in terms of any confidentiality issues or anything like that. But I think what you and I talked about, Chance, was the way we were going to do it was there shouldn't be any concerns about that particular issue.
And just for clarification for everybody, the way we're going to do this is that with the licensing and anything outside of enforcement, it seems, then the correspondence that's sent to the trainee will be copied to the supervisor. With enforcement, it will be a little bit different because there are some potential confidentiality issues. It will be a notice. It won't be a copy of what's sent to the trainee, but it will be a notice that the trainee was contacted by the board or had correspondence with the board. And it would be a broad category would be defined. For instance, on, August 18th, TALCB contacted your trainee about an enforcement issue. And so, excuse me, it'll simply be that notice in those cases. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tony.
No, that is absolutely right. I think that's the way we can make sure that we're within the confines of the confidentiality issue and also communicating to the supervisory appraisers the way that the board would like us to do that.
Well, I'd like to see that, what we can implement, as we can implement it, it is implemented.
Okay.
Unless there's somebody has objection to that.
I just had a question. So on A and B, I totally agree and think that's a great move for our agency. How will those things be publicized so that the appraisers are aware of this awesome change?
Well, when we did the audit or the removal of the work file requirement from audits, it was sent out as to the email subscription list through that.
Okay.
It was also posted on the website.
Right. Okay, so that they're aware of it.
I would see it the same way.
Same way.
And one of the things, Buster, I just wanted to let you know, in the process of the upgrade license, when we notify a supervisor about that, the part of that process will also be to disengage that relationship for the future. I know that was a concern of yours, that relationship's out there kind of forever, and we're working in a way to combine these two things so we're able to do both of those, communicate about the upgrade, but also afterwards sever that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Very good, very good. That's good. I'm glad to hear that. If you permit me, Madam Chair, I would like to go back and clarify something in item A. And Chance, you're going to have to help me out on this because everybody knows I'm part of the enforcement committee. But just to make this clear, are we talking solely about removing the work file just from an experience audit? We're not including the what used to be a voluntary program that became mandatory, that when a supervisor has more than 3 trainees, they have to submit their appraisals at, I can't remember, 50% and 80% of their work log. They have to still submit appraisals for review, and that part of that was the work file, or is the work file. So are we still requiring that work file?
Well, I don't know that we've addressed that. This was a discussion about the, licensing audits or audits resulting from a applicant. So that's a good question. I think that maybe we can have alternative language that staff prepares that might include that. And then when we take this up in the enforcement committee, then we can make that decision.
Yeah, I would think that we could apply the same philosophy across all, the idea of not asking for the work file was that it was sort of representative of the fact that we weren't doing a deep dive. And so I think that that's probably something that we would want to do across all audits and not, and not just certain audits.
As well as saving time.
I would agree with you, Sarah. And that's why I wanted to bring that up, is because I fully knew and couldn't recall, Chance and Tony, that in any of our discussion, we ever brought that portion of the, that part of it up. We never discussed that. And, you know, it's because I guess we sometimes can't think of everything. But we do have that program, if you all recall. We had to put that in when we jumped from 3 to 5. We had to put something in place to show that there was a little bit more supervision and monitoring on the agency's behalf of these trainees. And so I agree with Sarah. If we don't think a work file is needed for an experience audit, I'm not so sure a work file is needed for that mandatory program of reviewing their appraisals.
I think that's a great point, and I think that should be included in the language that we look at in a committee meeting, and I agree. I think that's something we should take up for recommendation.
Great catch.
Okay, very good.
Great catch. Thank you.
Okay, any more on B, 21B? Then let's go to 21C, discussion possible action regarding designation of a working group to recommend policy to implement a board enforcement review process under the peer investigative committee statute. And so we alluded to this when I gave the enforcement report earlier, but basically our original idea to have these board enforcement review panels had a lot of red tape that had to be written and created, and it was a really, I think, a large barrier. And so we started to look at, well, we have existing framework for the board to be involved with and have oversight over enforcement matters. And the suggestion was made in the enforcement committee that we create a working group to look at that statute and see how it might apply. I think that there's elements to our peer investigative committee process that maybe are not being implemented in the spirit of the law. And so so in doing so, this committee can take a look at that. And what I'm envisioning is that we reform the process that, one, allows board oversight of review of investigative matters, as well as making sure that we are utilizing the peer investigative committee statute in the way it's intended. So at this point, like I said earlier, in the next week or so, I'm going to be putting together this working group, and then my intent is that we will have something prior to the next enforcement committee meeting as a result of that working group for either rule changes, no rule changes, whichever direction the working group goes. But I will be forming that up, and as I said earlier, if you have any interest, please let me know, and I will and stay tuned.
I volunteer.
Thank you, Mr. Bolton. I certainly appreciate that, and we look forward to the work of that working group. Anybody have any other questions for Mr. Bolton on agenda item number 21? Any of those three?
Chair,
Yes,
if I
ma'am.
may interrupt. My recommendation at this point, sort of for best practice and making sure that the intention of the board is clear, is that if there was a motion on this, it would be to form the working group. And that would be my recommendation, to make sure this is in the minutes and everything's clear in informing this.
Okay, and so how do we do that? Do we then would the motion be to form the committee, to appoint Mr. Bolton as the chair of the committee, and give him the ability to appoint the members? What are our options as far as making that motion?
You know, it's kind of up to you on that. It'd be clean to, I think, have the motion to form the committee. And Mr. Bolton, I know you're taking the lead with this, so it's really up to you to how you want to structure it at that point. But as I've stated, I think the best practice is just getting that motion on forming this working group.
Okay.
Well, I'll make the motion. I move that we form a working committee and that I chair that committee and appoint the members of that committee in pursuit of looking at a pure investigative statute for possible rule changes.
A second.
We have a motion by Mr. Bolton and a second by Ms. Robinson. Does anybody have any further discussion about forming this committee? All those in favor?
Aye.
Is anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Bolton, for taking that on.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Agenda item number 22 is the overview of the role of the Office of the Governor's Regulatory Compliance Division in TALCB's rulemaking process. And we had brought this up, I believe, at the last meeting and said that we would give the board some more information on what exactly this is. I know that one of TREC's proposed rules triggered this process, and so I thought it was timely to have Kat give us the in-depth discussion of it so that we're aware of it in case it happens to one of our rules as we're going through the process.
Okay, hello again, everybody. And as Madam Chair stated, I'm going to provide sort of an overview of the function of the Governor's Regulatory Compliance Division as it applies to our rules, a little bit of background of its origin story, the sort of types of rules and issues that are implicated, that division's process in reviewing, and what it all means to the board for you all as policymakers. So just a little bit of the background story of this. This was created by Senate Bill 1995 during the 86th legislative session and went into effect this past fall. So this is still a relatively new division in their functions. What they are doing are conducting an independent review of agency proposed rules. And it's not going to be every single agency or every rule, but specific licensing agencies and rules that affect market competition. The real impetus to creating this division was a Supreme Court case, the North Carolina State Board of Dental Examiners. And, you know, a more thorough discussion of this case is available in your board training materials and is on our website if you want to download it for members of the public that like to download it. It's available there. The real gist of this case is that an agency can have a rule or take action that affects market competition. However, that rule must be, number one, consistent with state policy, and number two, that agency action and activity must be actively monitored by the state. And now kind of the net effect is that we can't adopt or finally adopt a proposed rule that is under this division's review until we receive the division's approval. So kind of giving a background a little bit on the types of rules that are implicated and when would a rule affect market competition. A rule would affect market competition if, one, it would create a barrier to market participation in the state, or if two, if it would result in higher prices or reduced competition for a product or service provided by or to a license holder of the state. And so, you know, I went through some of the rulings, and as Madam Chair mentioned, that on the TREC side, they faced some of these, some of the rules have been reviewed by the division. They had a rule that implemented a time limitation on the validity of exam results. That was one that they found that could create a financial barrier to those having to retake an exam, but also found that this was consistent with state policy of making sure that license holders are competent at the time of licensure. So that was approved by the division. An example of a rule that was not approved by the division came to, I believe these were license holders who were marriage or family therapists. They had a rule up for proposal that required some additional education for those that were already licensed, but it was additional education for instances when you're providing their services based on technology and based on the delivery method of their services. So, you know, kind of in the same format that we're having our meeting right now, sort of that virtual format. The division found that this was outside of this agency's statutory authority. And they kind of distinguished this from kind of continuing education classes. It wasn't for maintaining your license. It was sort of in addition to already required or in addition, additional requirements for those who were already licensed. So those are just kind of two examples that I had of the types of rules that would be implicated. Moving on to sort of how the review process itself works. So after we would propose a rule, and that rule was posted in the Texas Register for that notice and comment period, we would have to submit a memorandum to the division, and they've provided us, and it's included in your materials, an example of a template that they would like us to fill out. And if you look at the questions that they're asking in that template, they're asking, you know, what are the legal issues around this rule, some factual issues. They ask for sort of the sources of discussion if it came up in a committee meeting. And to me, all those questions are really geared at, you know, trying to help them make that determination if this rule is within state policy and also still monitoring the agency. So after you submit this template or the memorandum, they say that within 90 days, they will make a determination. And in that time, they can actually ask a state agency for additional information, for additional analysis, and can even conduct public hearings. And in that determination, they'll state, you know, whether they approve, if they disapprove, and if they do disapprove, they do offer some guidance on how you could revise that rule language so that it would come into compliance. And with all this being said, what does it mean for you all as board members, as policy members? You know, it's just important to be aware that this is just another step in the process, that it could take longer than you might anticipate to get a rule passed. You know, for me, I will be the one working on the memo, so that's not really any additional work for you all. And if there is a rule that, you know, we may not initially think implicates the market competition, this division is monitoring the Texas Register. And so they will let us know if there's a rule that we're proposing that implicates their division. And so I know this is a very brief overview. I welcome your questions if you have any. And if you don't think of it right away, you know, I'm available by email to address your questions later on.
So Kat, with the TREC rule, how long did it take? They have 90 days. Did it delay the process?
It did. They had to go back and actually revise some of the rules. And, you know, in that 90-day period, I think, so our last meeting was May 15th. Proposed rules aren't posted to the register immediately. 90 days after about that would have been about last week. So, I mean, it might, you know, take another cycle of meetings to actually make those changes for it to get their approval.
Right. Okay. I think that's if I could just, if you know any more about the family therapist thing. So they were basically just saying, if you're going to provide telemedicine type therapy, you have to take a class. And the division said that's outside of the scope of what you're authorized to do. Is that correct?
Yes. And, you know, part of it was because I don't think the additional requirement was based on how they were delivering their services as opposed to their qualifications. And I think they made a distinction between, they weren't asking these same requirements for all their other license holders. And so that was sort of a distinction that they made for that one. And again, there's very limited information on what's available on that. So I'd be happy to dig in on the issue a little more if you have any further questions.
I guess that makes sense. I think that if that had been a rule for us, you know, I don't know that we would have necessarily thought about that, but I guess hearing those types of examples does help us to reframe the rule changes that we propose so that we think about that. Is that in the scope of what, you know, we are authorized to do as a board, as opposed to just, this sounds like a good idea for the industry, so we should do it, which it sounds like that was sort of their intent. So yeah, I do think that I would love for you to just kind of monitor those, whether they are with TREC or with any other agency, just so that we know, so that we can make our rules with that in mind and hopefully not have delays.
Absolutely. And they make one thing that makes that process easier is they post that information and have the termination letters posted on their website. And also I should add that it's not just new rules or amendments, it's also reenactment of existing rules that are applicable. So, I mean, it's bound to come up, and it will come up very soon, I'm sure.
Very good. And I would note too that when Ms. Reed Lynch and I talked to the people at this division, that we did make it known that we're very much aligned with the governor's directive of lowering barriers to entry and not raising them and trying to pull up the ladder behind us, that's kind of the opposite of our intent. So I hope that, that us just even saying that kind of helps them to understand that we as a board, that is our sort of our overriding goal.
And maybe when we make these rule changes or changes, that we can phrase them to prevent, being seen or as limiting, and at the same time reduce the rule review time and create additional changes and then just taking longer and longer. So if we're just mindful of what they're looking at, and you can help us, then I think our process will be faster and better served.
And so that's sort of part of what that memo that goes with it is, sort of you giving explaining it so that they're not just reading the rule, they're kind of reading the background around it. Is that?
Yes, it's just kind of providing them the tools that they need to really make that determination.
Fantastic. Yeah, and we're happy to help if there's ever a time when something comes up that, we can put it into, layman's terms.
This is Lisa. Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Coming from a legal standpoint, can you prepare specific questions for the board so that when we make a rule change, we can ask ourselves, does it do this? Does it do that? Have we eliminated this or that? If you could come up with some kind of very basic legal terminology or terminology of questions we can ask ourselves to make sure that we don't go over that line. Is that possible?
Absolutely. I mean, I could work out, a series of questions. Like I said, this process is fairly new with the governor's office. And in my review of it, there were some rules that I was sort of surprised that didn't strike me initially as having that anti-competitive effect. And so, I'm more than happy to prepare those type of things to make sure you're all aware of, we're all asking the right type of questions.
That would be really helpful.
Yeah, I love that idea, Lisa, and maybe even at the committee level, just as we talk about rules, that if staff is introducing the language at the committee level, we say, we've already answered, is this within the scope of our authority? Is it, and so Kat can kind of build those generic questions so that we just kind of have that in our mind as we are talking through the language of the changes. Maybe not something exhaustive, maybe some,
Yeah, usually
I think that's a great idea.
Usually you can ask yourself 3 or 4 questions and already see where there might be a problem or you're clear. So if we could just get some guidance on that, then I think we could use it every time we talk about a rule or anything else that we want to change.
Great idea.
Absolutely.
Very good. Does anybody else have any questions for Kat about this process? Very good. I think we will then move on to the next agenda item. I do want to make note that Mr. Pena had to leave the meeting and he gave prior notice of that, so he is no longer in attendance. We will move to agenda item number 23, which is the discussion regarding the performance review and salary of the commissioner. So as a reminder to the public, TREC holds the authority for action as it relates to the commissioner's employment and salary. However, we do have a memorandum of understanding between the commission and the board that stipulates that TREC will seek and consider our input as a portion of the commissioner's salary does come from the board's budget. Accordingly, the board participated in an evaluation and received a report that we reviewed in executive session of all of the performance surveys that were completed by the commission, the board, and agency staff. The responses and recommendations from TREC were in alignment with the board. So it's important to note that all of the scoring was satisfactory or above, with the vast majority of the scores in the exceeds expectations category, and there were no numerical deficiencies identified. The commissioner got glowing reviews from staff, which, to my understanding, is a new thing that's been added to the commissioner's evaluation, which was extremely helpful to those of us reading it. So that was great to see how it all works on the inside. Quite a few of them mentioned how approachable and available the commissioner is, and another recurring theme was that she cares deeply about the staff, that they feel heard and valuable, and that she is supportive of staff. So that's consistent with what we thought was happening, and so we're definitely glad to hear that. I do want to thank the board members and the staff for taking the time to complete these and provide feedback for the commissioner. I know that she welcomes feedback as she has started this role and is not even into her first full year of doing it. So we certainly appreciate that. We really appreciate staff filling these out. Our oversight is greatly benefited from honest feedback from staff about how the agency is run on a day-to-day basis. So I definitely want to thank staff for providing that feedback for us so that we know how things are going. I'd like to commend the commissioner on our handling of the numerous challenges during these unprecedented times. The fact that this agency was able to pivot to work from home and continue providing the vast, complex, and time-sensitive services that it does, mostly uninterrupted, is definitely a testament to her leadership. So we appreciate you, and on behalf of the license holders, we thank you for that. I open the floor to any other additional comments from the board.
I think you said it great. Said it well. Well done.
Absolutely. I would second that. We're very happy to work with you, Chelsea, and everything that you've accomplished in the short amount of time you've had that position. We are very grateful, and we look forward to continuing to partner with you. Great job.
Great job.
Thank you,
Chelsea. I think it's commendable that you're receiving such high accolades even early into your tenure, and I think that's a testament to what you've achieved and good things to come. So we're happy to see that your efforts are well rewarded with the comments.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So we will evaluate commissioner's performance again in February to get back on a normal cycle since her hire, and she started in January. So that sort of reset. So we will see that again shortly. Agenda item number 24, discussion and possible action regarding possible topics for the November workshop. So does anybody have anything that they would like to add to the November workshop, discuss in the November workshop? It is by policy that we have some sort of training, and I think it's supposed to fall in with the November board meeting. So I will say that hopefully we will have a new appointment in Mr. Jeffrey's absence, and so possibly just general board training would be helpful at that time for the new board member, and that gives us all a chance, if we're covering everything, gives us a chance to have any clarifications that we need at that time.
So just to confirm, there are mandatory requirements for certain types of training that will occur prior to January, correct? That we have to do.
I think statutorily training is necessary. Okay. I don't know if it's annually, but I do know that November date is somewhere. I don't know whether it's in rules or policy or.
Okay.
There's annual training required, but we will make sure that you have it in advance, and it may not be necessary to go through all of that training together. It could be that we send you reading materials just to complete before January. So we'll streamline it as much as we can.
I appreciate that. I just want to make sure we meet our requirements on what we have to do. The other thing, if we do happen to have a new board member join us by then, what was extremely helpful for me when I joined was to talk a little bit about the sunset requirements and kind of the direction and the things that we've done in order to be in compliance of what they've recommended for us. So that may be something to touch on, just something to consider if we can do it in a concise way, just to kind of introduce a new board member to what our direction needs to be.
I think that's a great recommendation. So we will certainly add that to the training, and we'll work with staff on what that looks like, what that entails, so that we make sure that all the good things are covered.
Awesome.
Okay, agenda item number 25 is the discussion and possible action regarding agenda items for future meetings. I can't think of anything today that was brought up that I put on my carry forward list, but does anybody else have anything that comes to mind? I think that most of the stuff that we covered is probably going to be addressed at the committee level before we meet again. And so I think that will sort of tell us what our next agenda will look like. Does anybody have anything else? Okay, agenda item number 26, discussion and possible action to schedule future meeting and workshop dates. So we had tentatively set the November meeting for the 12th and 13th. My preference would be if we are meeting virtually again, or whether we are or not, or however that is happening, that maybe we split up the workshop date. If we are in person, then it makes more sense, obviously, to have them back to back. But at this point, assuming that it's going to be virtual, if we could move the workshop to maybe the 10th, Tuesday the 10th, for the morning of that day, and leave the board meeting on the 13th. Does that work for everybody to split those 2 days up, since they will be virtual?
Yes, that would work for
Yes.
me.
Madam Chair, I move that we move the next workshop date to the morning of November 10th and keep the board meeting date of November 13th.
Could I, I'll second that, but could I actually add an addendum to that? Unless we're meeting in person, as you pointed out, then if we're meeting in Austin, then it would be back-to-back Thursday, Friday. But I would second Chance's motion with that addendum. Can I do it that way?
Is that
Clayton, I accept your addendum to my motion.
I think it's a good idea.
I do.
Does that work for the lawyers in the room? Very good. Then we have a motion by Mr. Bolton and a second by Mr. Black. Any further discussion? I will add that if there is a way that we could figure out how we could meet in person for anybody who wants to do that, if we could get real creative about a hybrid model, or, you know, in some way being in the same room. We're talking about hybrid because all the kids are doing that remotely, right? Like some of the kids might be virtual and some might be in person. Even if it means at that time that there is more availability of testing and that we could get tested before we're all in the room together. We want to make sure that staff is 100% comfortable with whatever their involvement is in that. So just maybe start thinking about that, to ask staff to start thinking about that, and how we can do that, if we can do that safely and within everybody's own personal boundaries on that.
We'll begin working on that. The commission asked for the same thing, and we're examining the technology options of meeting in the room where you normally physically meet, how to do that while maintaining a virtual option. That's the challenge, is to be able to meet in that room, to be able to have a large enough space for meeting, but allow for the virtual concept to be shown on a video screen to those who are publicly there or who are physically there, right? And to kind of truly have a hybrid model. So we have begun that examination. We'll keep you posted on that.
So I might suggest that I think we're already there. I don't know how many people are still in the room with you guys, but you'll seem to do it pretty well.
We do. We have 3 in here, and we could potentially accommodate about 3 more. So on a very small scale, that could work. Yeah. But it doesn't work if we get any grander than that.
I wonder if we could, all have separate laptops as you do, and then use like the public meeting room. It's a lot more space.
Right.
And you've got screens in there too, and cameras, and.
That's a great idea. You can have plenty of space to spread out.
Hi, Steve Rapp, if I could interject real quick on that.
Absolutely.
The challenge becomes the latter part of your statement, sir, which is incorporating the cameras, the audio and video of that room, injecting that into the audio and video of the team's environment that we're using now. That becomes a real challenge. Yeah, we could set up in any room you like and spread out, but when you're talking about incorporating those technologies as well, the challenge gets a little tougher. We've already reached out to the folks that manage this for us and asked them what solutions or what thoughts they have on blending that, because I think this is likely to be something, maybe even hopefully something we'll be dealing with forever, where absences are done through this instead. So we've already met and are pursuing a solution.
Very good.
Thank you, Steve.
I do, again, want to just be cognizant of the fact that if the board members come, that it will be on a voluntary basis, and I want to make sure that staff has that same opportunity, that it's not a requirement of staff if they're not comfortable doing it, because there obviously is a difference when it's a volunteer thing for us and it's a condition of your employment for someone else. So I want to be cognizant of that. So any further discussion? We still have a motion on the table.
Just for clarification, Chance, yours, okay, 10 o'clock on Tuesday, was that like 8 in the morning or 10? What did we? Or
Pretty sure it's 10.
Yeah, let's do 10.
Just so I can put it in my calendar, because I'm going to sleep between now and then. And then, yes, if there's any way to meet in person, I mean, I would love it. But regardless, I will make sure I am present, however it happens.
So regardless of whether we meet in person or not on the 13th, I think that doing the workshop virtually on the 10th still makes sense. Is that aligned with everybody else? Okay, very good. And if Dion will, Tony's back, it looks like. Well, so if Tony is back, then we can get his opinion, but I just wanted to make sure, Dion, that we okay those dates with Tony since he's not here, if he's not here. All right, all those in favor of Chance's amended motion?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Aye.
Very good. So, the time is now 2:21, and this meeting is adjourned. I would like to say goodbye to Mr. Jeffries. I hope that you don't go and work this afternoon. I hope that you go celebrate your long tenure and your good job with a cocktail. And I wish that we were doing it with you, but unfortunately we're not. So I would like to say formally goodbye.
Thank you so very much, everybody.
Bye. Thank you. It's been our pleasure.
Thank you, Jim. We're going to miss you.
Good job.
I'll toast to you tonight.
Yes, I'll toast you tonight too. Thank you, Jim.
Very good. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.